One of the things I want to address is the whole issue of mind control techniques and how this applies to what cults do to control and manipulate their members. And one of the best things that I've found is the information provided in Robert J. Lifton's book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, that was published, the research was done in the 50s, and it was originally done with a focus on prisoners of war and the Chinese re-education programs. And what they did is they went in and they interviewed people who had gone through the re-education programs and took a look at what techniques were used to change people from behaving in one way or thinking in a certain belief system into adopting what the present propaganda was, and in effect controlling what they thought. And out of the research, what he was able to pull out were there were 8 major techniques or criteria that were used to control people's minds and get them to change. And it's really interesting to see how these 8 criteria can be used to take a look at how cults control and manipulate their own members. The 8 criteria initially are milieu control, mystical manipulation, a demand for purity, confession, sacred science, loading the language, doctrine over the person, and dispensing of existence. And what I'll do is I'll go through each one so that you get a better idea of what it is as Lifton defined it, and I'll see what I can do about applying it to how cults use it, and specifically how the cult I was in, the Jehovah's Witnesses, use it. The 5th criteria is a sacred science. And again, this comes back also to a little bit of the spirituality and that their power comes from God, or authority comes from God. But it's also the ideology, not just the authority, but rather that what they believe is God-given, which again makes it very difficult for people to break apart from it, because God says this. So there's always, no matter what you say, it's, yeah, but God says this. And as soon as you introduce an element of mysticism or spirituality into something, people have no or very little ability to fight that and to say, yeah, but there's something fundamentally wrong. For example, at one point while I was a witness, they changed policies drastically and then back again. We were never allowed to speak to ex-witnesses, people who had been disfellowshipped. And they at one point said, well, there were certain circumstances where we could talk to ex-members, and which was a really great relief, because we had an uncle in our family who had been disfellowshipped, and we couldn't talk to him. And when they changed the policy and said we could, it was like, wow, this is so wonderful, this is great. We can now have, even a superficial relationship with them. And I think what happened is that a lot of people started talking to ex-members and finding out a lot of information that was not allowed to have. And so they changed the policy back again. And the explanation of this was never very clear, except it comes from God. There's no way to fight that. And if you believe that the governing body is the messenger between man and God, you have no way to argue. And saying anything different is generally squashed, or you're accused of doubting, and then you're kind of under suspicion.